They will talk about further steps of regional partners to facilitate Afghan political settlement, stabilize humanitarian, social, economic situation in this country. Special attention will be paid to the dynamics of development of regional economic integration and implementation of transport and energy projects with the participation of Kabul, according to the previous agreements. On the 14th of April in Samarkand, under the presidency of Kyrgyz Republic, another meeting of the Council of Foreign Ministers of CIS will take place. They will talk about relevant national regional topics, speak about prospects of development and strengthening of multifaceted cooperation in CIS, as well as will take stock of the interaction 2022. They plan to take some decisions in law enforcement, culture, humanitarian, and educational spheres. Some of them then will be submitted for subsequent approval of heads of state and government. The Russian Friendship University of Patrice Lumumba will receive a status of basic organization of CIS for training and retraining of journalists. On the 14th of April, the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, will participate in the 6th meeting of foreign ministers of Russia and Central Asia, Republic of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Republic of Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Republic of Uzbekistan will participate. It will take place in Samarkand. They'll speak about prospective directions of six-nation cooperation in politics, diplomacy, trade, economy, transport, energy, culture, and humanitarian sphere, as well as mechanisms for its effective implementation in line with the first summit Russia-Central Asia that took place on the 14th of October 2022 in Astana. During these events, there will be also bilateral meetings of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. We will inform you about this as we always do. You know the site of our foreign ministry and our accounts in social networks. Let's pass to the Ukrainian crisis, the 7th of April. It was 9 years since the Congress of Representatives of Administrative and Territorial Entities of the Donetsk Republic approved the Declaration on Sovereignty and Act on Proclamation of State independence of Donetsk People's Republics. They also took a decision on conducting a referendum on the 11th of May 2014 about self-determination of DPR. Everyone knows the results. A new republic appeared on the map. It went through a very complex way before it became internationally recognized. The DPR is intrinsically linked to Russia. That is why they decided to join Russian Federation as a result of the referendum in September 2022. You all know about these events, how everything was developing. The links will be presented in the text of today's briefing. Today in DPR, LPR, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, people return to peaceful life, despite everything that we hear from Kiev regime, from the regimes of the collective West. Peace will be there. People will live in peace according to the values defended by them, by their ancestors for years, for decades, for centuries. According to the Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Marat Husnulin, in 2022, hundreds of kilometers of gas pipelines were built. An independent system of supply was created in Zaporizhia. In Mariupol, 11,000 houses were repaired. The statistics should also have some we should add some emotional information. All these roads, all these pipelines, all these buildings are built not just in complex conditions. They are built despite everything that is being implemented by those who were abusing people all these years. All these pipelines, roads, buildings, infrastructure, all of this is built, but we need to understand the risk to life of those who do this. We all know the site called Mirotvorets or Peacemaker, and there is a list with the potential victims of the Kiev regime. And a lot is being done against these people, and these people work against this terrible ideology. So when you hear about buildings, about schools, about kindergartens that are not being built there, remember it. I know personally people who work in the region that went there from Moscow region, from other regions of our country. They represent federal and regional bodies, municipal bodies. Now they are trying to help people return to peaceful life. This is how it is done. They don't think about their health or their lives, their circumstances. They're not thinking about their personal security and well-being. They think about the future of people, the future of all the regions. But first of all, we understand that when we speak about regions, we speak about people. These are not just numbers. These numbers represent history, the history of constructiveness, the history of countering destruction, the history of love, of being true, of being true to traditional values. So just don't think that it's just statistics, just numbers. It's not like that. It's more than that. This year, the pace of building, as it was said, will increase. I'll repeat. The pace, kilometers, meters, square meters, cubic meters will increase, but the contribution will be more as the work, the spiritual work implemented by the people, so that people in this region could feel in peace, in that they lived in prosperity. And we also need to remember all the people and generations of people who did everything for the peace in this region. The program of preferential mortgage at 2% starts in these regions. The government of Russia prepares a program to repair roadways, about 21,000 kilometers. In the nearest future, the situation with cell phone coverage will be improved. The water pipeline destroyed by UAF in 2014 for DPR is ready, and water supply will be started to Donetsk. Water, electricity is one more aim of the Kiev regime, of those who support it. We have spoken about this for many years. They stopped water supply. They put mines into the electric networks. But now it is obvious that those who did not support Kiev, the Kiev regime, would always live without electricity and water. Those who supported Kiev regime will live okay, in good conditions, and those who preserve traditional values will not have any future. On the 10th of April, we celebrated the 79th anniversary of liberation of Odessa from Nazi and Romanian occupants. Despite all the decades despite this, now the city again suffers from Nazism, but of Ukrainian origin. Neo-Nazis from Western Ukraine reign there. There are no mass events dedicated to this date. So there is no such date for those who live in Odessa. There is no such date in the history books. Do we not remember what was in the past? Do you not have any problems with your consciousness? So you can leave the songs of those times, about those events. You can glorify those who wrote these songs. But what are these songs about? Who are they dedicated to? People don't need to know how they were created. This is how it happens now. it should not be like that, and it will not be like that, because we will speak about this, we will remind about this. Despite the terror started by the authorities, the locals always remember who freed them from brown plague. These were the soldiers of the Red Army, and I'll remind once again, the soldiers of the Red Army did not have any differences. They did not divide themselves by religion or nationality. It was a multinational force. They were thinking of how to liberate themselves, their relatives, and not just relatives, but everyone, those people they didn't know, from the evil that was on our planet. We hope that they will get rid of oppression of Ukrainian neo-Nazis, will become free. And as Leonida Tosov sang, it will be again a sunny city by the Black Sea with blooming acacias. Another date is a tragical one. In 2 days, on the 14th of April, it will be 9 years since acting president of Ukraine, Turchinov, started an so-called anti-terrorist operation in Donbass. This was the start of violent suppression of the protest of the civilians in the region that decided to stand up against the government of national Nazi radicals. It was not just extremist, it was unlawful. It came to power because of unconstitutional armed coup d'etat in February 2014 in Kiev. It wasn't a national one, an internal one. It was external. Just remember how many foreign ministers of the European Union, of the US, were there during the so-called popular events at Maidan. Just remember what technological, material, informational assistance was given by the collective West, as well as by the integrational structures as the EU. Just remember how they together were singing songs. But in fact, they were dealing with political architecture, but I cannot tell this because this is something constructive, but they were destructing the foundations of statehood of Ukraine. They were destroying the essence of the society, of the state on the territory of Ukraine. They did it. Their money was used. They did it. They gathered all the people at Maidan. They created the symbols. They could do this only with great financial support. I will remind that the punitive operation that started there claimed lives of thousands of innocent people, including children and women. The West was not just silencing it, it was participating in it actively. It was observing what was helping, it was condoning, it was financing it, it was participating directly in it. Then was just governing the relevant processes. After this step of the Kiev regime, it is obvious the handle of the bloody actions that was set in motion by junta in Donbass in 8 years made Russia start special military operation for denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, and to eliminate of threats for this Russian security. The West continues to supply Ukraine with weapons, demands to continue hostilities. They don't think about victims. Anglo-Saxons do not hide that the variant of possible ceasefire is absolutely unacceptable for them. And they are saying that they are not party in the conflict. They are stressing it. And they are saying that they expect from Kiev decisive steps and readiness for massacre, as we understand, till the last Ukrainian. The direct military assistance of US to Ukraine steadily grows. It reached $35.8 billion. It's more than GDP indicators of Cyprus and Ireland, and it is comparable to the Estonian GDP. Most part of this money, around $35 billion, was allocated after the beginning of the special military operation. Kiev regime receives from Washington different types of heavy offensive weapons, ammunition, and gear. Bilateral military supplies are also provided by 28 of 31 NATO countries. It's more than 65 billion euros. The alliance keeps saying that the organization is not providing any direct military help to Kiev regime and is not a party in conflict, which what they're stressing every time. The structures of the bloc coordinate logistics, help to distribute Ukrainian requests for weapons, and modernize UAF administration systems. They also gather intelligence, give this intelligence. So there are different ways of doing that. At the same time, NATO is also supplies so-called non-lethal materials in line with comprehensive assistance package to Ukraine and through trust funds. They implement projects for more than 500 million euros to give Kiev special means to fight drones, engineer pontoon equipment, fuel and lubricants, medicine, medical and fire trucks. Since 28 of February 2022, the EU, in fact, reoriented its European Peace Fund for supplying weapons to Ukrainian authorities. There was 7 tranches, and they allocated more than 3.7 billion euros. In less than a year, it exhausted the resources of the fund. They had to be used to increase security of all the regions of the world till 2027. Just imagine it. So the sum that was there and the sum that was spent for the actions in Ukraine, this money had to be used to support security in different regions of the world till 2027. On the 13th of March, the EU countries had to add money to the budget of the fund for more than 2 billion euros, and its volume reached almost 8 billion. They are going to provide UAF with artillery projectiles. So the money of the EU taxpayers are going to be absorbed by Ukrainian black hole, as well as by US military-industrial complex. The main goal is to prolong hostilities on the European continent. The EU has allocated to Ukraine around 13 billion euros. They also train Ukrainian soldiers in line with the EU mission to support Ukraine. It assumed an obligation to train by the end of 2023 30,000 militants of UAF and neo-Nazi battalions. The weapons provided by the West, Ukrainian army and foreign mercenaries is used to kill civil population in DPR, LPR, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. Residential areas are subject to shellings, as well as the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and we all understand all the consequences and threats of a nuclear catastrophe. We have repeatedly sounded the alarm about the weapons that go to Ukraine, anti-craft, anti-tank complexes. Because of the corruption and in political and military circles, these weapons appears in other regional conflicts. It is used by criminals, by terrorist extremists in Europe, for instance, in this garden that Josep Borrell talks about. We need to understand that no one is going to stay aside. It creates threats for internal security for every state on the European continent, in particularly in the sphere of civil air traffic.
Well, that is simple and basic analytics, accessible to everyone. It's not hard to take a look at what happened after the occupation and aggression by the US. I'm talking about the anti-Iraqi coalition in Baghdad, what kind of terrorist attacks took place, what kind of weaponry was supplied, and what kind of terrorist organization came into being. The same goes to Libya, the same goes to the Arab Spring in general. We have all seen that. It looks like the Western regimes drew no conclusions from these mistakes. They didn't do any homework. On the 5th of April, New York hosted an informal session of the UNSC on the ARIA formula upon Russia's initiative on the separation of children from the Ukrainian refugees in Europe. I'm talking about the wonderful part of Europe, according to Joseph Borrell, and we see the atrocious situation there. The children are taken away by locals without any consent of families, and they do not want to give them back. In March 2022, Spain had accommodated 85 children with disabilities from orphanages in the DPR. 77 of them were later put in the Spanish orphanages, and we do not know anything about their fate. What about the forces that support the ICC and shout that this is the right way of dealing it? Don't they want to ask a question regarding these children? Everything that was told around notorious decisions that are not in line with any legal norms. Actually, you can get any information on any child, and at this venue, at the Foreign Ministry premises, we hosted a detailed conference of the Russian Children's Rights Commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova. She described the situation, and she said that she's also ready to exchange information on the fate of any kid. Could you please tell me what kind of hypocrisy, blatant hypocrisy, are we talking about? Inhumane treatment of kids. Children are disappearing in the EU countries, and they are of interest to no one, either individually or en masse. They don't care about that. We talked about that. We provided quotes, and there were a plethora of these quotes that stipulate that official representatives, law enforcers, executive authorities of the EU countries directly stipulated that that was a real problem for them. Ukrainian citizens disappearing in their territories, children and women, because they are not registered anywhere, and after that they become victims of violence, trafficking, smuggling, and so on and so forth. No one in Brussels or Washington cares about that. The answer to that question is simple, because they don't care about people at all. What they're interested at is to supply billions of dollars to capitalize on this situation, to get benefits. They are interested in destruction, because in this case they can pursue their policy without anybody being in their way. Such an attitude of the European states contradicts to everything. It contradicts traditional Christian values. And let me remind you that that is the framework of what has been taking shape in the European continent for over a century. This is at odds with human rights, this so-called new concept that appeared in the European continent in the 20th century. It has no other explanation other than what I have provided, and this is a complete neglect to the fate of the most vulnerable group of people, namely children. Ukraine continues to pursue oppressions against Orthodox priests. They are being treated and horribly and abused. Lately, there's been a video on the internet with the beating of Bishop Nikita. And the most atrocious thing is that local authorities are encouraging such an attitude. They encourage bullying. Law enforcers do not bring to justice a culprit who is quite visible on the video, and it all gives to the Ukrainian neonazis, a sense of impunity. Unfortunately, sectoral international organizations, including UNESCO, the OSCE, as well as the international community, do not condemn crimes against Orthodox Church, and the pinnacle of cynicism was the response by the U.S. State Department. I believe that that is a rare case when the comment of the U.S. spokesman drew attention of millions of people worldwide. Let me remind you that he claimed that he heard nothing about the persecution against Orthodox priests and seizures of cathedrals by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And maybe he could comment it on that, but later on. But despite all the attempts by the collective West and its Kiev protégés to harm Russia at all costs, the special military operation will go on until the tasks set by the Russian leadership are completed. I have another date, memorable date. The 12th of April marks 240 years since the Crimean Peninsula joined the Russian state. This date, in 1783, Empress Catherine II issued a manifesto on the accession of the peninsula of Crimea, the Taman Peninsula, and the Kuban part on its accession into the Russian Empire. The importance of this manifesto is hard to overrate. The peninsula of Crimea was returned to Russia, and this comes from the aspiration to ensure security of southern borders of Russia, to resolve important tasks, to further strengthen political, military, and economic might of the Russian Empire. Crimea's accession to Russia took place upon request of the citizens of the peninsula. Russian archives still have the so-called letters of allegiance. These are documents where the citizens of Crimea swore allegiance to Russia, and probably this was one of the most democratic forms of gaining new territories at that age. The people of Crimea were granted equal rights to compared to other nationalities, and this helped preserve their culture and identity. Immediately after its accession to the Novorossiya governorate, the Crimea started developing industrial and agricultural potential, and it has become a favorite resort destination to many generations of our compatriots. Given its strategic geographic situation, the peninsula has been targeted by aggressors more than once. Those who have not seen these sites, Sevastopol, Kerch, I advise you to come there, not just read about it, and you will feel this history. Locals will tell you about it. You will learn a lot from the monuments, and you will simply understand how many generations of our compatriots and ancestors fought for these lands. They fought till their death so that this land could not be subjected to the desecration that happened to it. Given its strategic geographic situation, as I've already mentioned, many had this desire to get Crimea. Let me remind you that Crimea is home to the city that is legendary, steeped in valor and glory of the Russian warriors. I'm talking about the city of Sevastopol, and the heroic courage of Crimeans is proved by the fact that Crimea has two hero cities, Sevastopol and Kerch. Crimea is part of our country, which was confirmed by the referendum on the 16th of March 2014. Back in the day, the citizens of Crimea made a deliberate choice to join Russia. Taking into account the importance of Crimea joining Russia, in 2018, the date of 19th of April was included in the official list of the military glory days of Russia. Upon the initiative of the Republic of Crimea and with the support of the Russian Historical Society, the Post of Russia will issue a stamp sheet dedicated to 240 years since the signing of this manifesto. I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to congratulate all Crimeans and all the citizens of Russia. Let me assure you that Crimea will always be part of Russia. These are not just mottos, words. This is a daily meticulous effort, the spiritual one as well. Basically, that is what the citizens of Crimea voted for in March 2014. Let's get down to other matters. On the 11th of April, at the line of contact between Azerbaijan and Armenia, an armed incident took place. Unfortunately, there were fatalities and casualties. Representatives of the armed forces and border control services of Russia immediately contacted responsible persons in Armenia and Azerbaijan and took measures to de-escalate the situation. What happened confirms once again the need for Baku and Yerevan to exercise mutual restraint and to strictly abide by the trilateral agreements between the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan and Armenia. A few words on Saudi Arabia being granted the SCO dialogue partner status. The finalizing of the interstate procedures by Saudi Arabia under the memorandum on the partner status became another step to strengthen joint potential of the mutual win-win safe development and strengthening connectivity on our broad space that brings together the SCO family countries. We are positive that the active effort to implement this document that comes into force will create additional opportunities for our interaction in ensuring regional security and stability, primarily to curb threats and challenges related to terrorism, extremism, drug trafficking, trans-border organized crime, illegal activities in ICTs. New prospects for trade and economic investment cooperation will open up for transport infrastructure and logistic connectivity as well, implementing projects in energy, agriculture, telecom, and other areas of mutual interest, promoting intercivilizational dialogue, deepening humanitarian ties, namely on cultural, educational, scientific, and technical tracks. For its part, Russia reaffirms its readiness to actively help Saudi Arabia and other SCO dialogue partners to make use of the opportunities provided by the organization to have a stable and confident national development. As you know, today we celebrate the World Cosmonauts Day. On the 12th of April 1961, Soviet citizen Senior Lieutenant Yuri Gagarin was the first to complete one orbit of Earth, traveling in the Vostok 1 capsule. It heralded an age of manned space missions. Instantly, he has become world famous, and basically he has become the citizens of the world. The launch of the first manned spacecraft is a triumph of Soviet space, of Soviet science, and I believe that this day we should remember all those who made dreams come true. The Vostok launch was administered by rocket systems designer Sergei Korolev, head of the Baikonur test range Kirillov, rocket engineer Leonid Voskresensky. On the 9th of April 1962, the Soviet Union decided that this will be the Cosmonautics Day, and it received international status at the Conference of the International Aviation Federation in 1968. Incidentally, since 2018, it has another name, the International Day of Human Space Flight. On the 7th of April 2011, upon Russia's initiative, the special session of the UNGA adopted an official resolution to mark 50 years since this development. The Russian Federation is a successor to the Soviet Union, and we take a principled stance when it comes to the development of space programs. Our country is working to adopt joint statements with other countries on no first placement of weapons in outer space. And by doing so, we try to make space a weapon-free zone. space for peace and cooperation. We try to focus on the development of civil technology. The best way to describe Russian position on space is to quote Yuri Gagarin. After flying around the Earth in a capsule, I saw how wonderful our planet is. People, let us cherish and multiply this beauty and not destroy it. End of quote. These are grand words of a unique person. In order to preserve this beauty and multiply it, we need culture, basically, that is composed of the very best from the civilization. On the 15th of April, Russia and many other countries celebrate International Culture Day. It is linked with the adoption of the Treaty on the Protection of Artistic and Scientific Institutions and Historic Monuments in 1935. In international legal terms, this document is known as the Rurik Pact, by the name of its author, an outstanding Russian artist and philosopher Nikolai Roerich. The document played an important role in shaping international law standards in culture, and it set the ground for developing universal international legal acts aimed at protecting the legacy and preserving world cultural diversity within the UNESCO, including 1954 Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict, Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property of 1970, the Convention concerning the Protection of the World Cultural and National Heritage of 1972. Let me remind you that Russia is party to all the mentioned international treaties, and it is living up to its obligations bona fide. The Russian culture is a part and parcel of the global cultural heritage. Our culture is rich, is unique, creative, highly spiritual. It serves an important tool for cooperation and international dialogue. We're open to cultural and humanitarian interaction with all those who respect and understand our country, its history, traditions, language, and achievements in the area of art. At the same time, lately, we have been seeing an unparalleled level of xenophobia. We call it Russophobia in a number of Western countries that turns into blatant discrimination and cancel culture. They coin various terms, not propaganda, but strategic communications. That's a quite beautiful language, but the crux of the matter is the same. That is hatred packed into some colorful package. But inside it is destruction. What do they want to destroy? They want to destroy what they created themselves, what they cannot comprehend and understand, let alone study, and they all decided to cancel it all. On the other hand, when they do not know what to cancel, they even don't name the artists, the grand composers. They forgot how to go to museums en masse. But if they visit museums, they just do it out of curiosity, because it's a habit or like a part of a business project. It is all obvious. Culture and art have become an art business. Everything is turned from something spiritual and genuine into something instant that could perish, and business projecting like. Why don't they try to cancel us? But that is not possible. We have repeatedly stated that, and that has been understood by all those who even had some doubts last year. The collective West basically unleashed a war against the Russian culture. Many years of partner relations have been severed. Politically charged betterment of national identity of Russian artists have been ongoing. They changed the names of artworks, the nationality of artists. They dismantled monuments, but that is nothing new. They have been doing it for decades. They make attempts to erase any manifestations of historical memory related to our country.
We not just doubt the level of culture and morality that they say they have, our ex-partners. It's more terrible, it's more complex. We're talking about the lack of humanity. It's not just about what some nations support. They are rejecting basic values of humanity. It's a more dramatic, more complex situation. It's not just a political campaign against our country. On the 3rd of April, there was the 20th meeting of the Ministries of Culture of the SCO. Vladimir Sintsev, Deputy Culture Minister, took part in it. National Museum of India opened a digital exhibition dedicated to common Buddhist heritage of SCO countries. It exhibits objects from the collection of the State Museum of Oriental Art. I'm talking about a Russian museum. India is a president of SCO, and it is implementing many projects in humanitarian cultural sphere, film festival SCO, 27th, 31st of January, cultural exhibition of SCO, and the context of craft festival, Sarajukund 2023, from the 3rd to the 19th of February, international conference about common cultural heritage of SCO, 14th, 15th of March, as well as the program of tourist and cultural capital of SCO. As you know, this honorary status for 2022-2023 was given to Varanasi in India. The parties supported the suggestion of Kazakhstan of declaring Almaty the next tourist and cultural capital of SCO. The final decision about the status will be taken during the meeting of the Council of the Heads of SCO. It continued other events of different, of a wide range of cooperation. We're talking about the meeting of Security Council secretaries in New Delhi on the 29th of March, Supreme Court presidents in New Delhi the 10th and 12th of March, the Minister of Finance, heads of central banks on the 3rd of March, ministers of energy on the 14th of March, heads of ministries responsible for physical culture and sports in New Delhi, 15th of March, as well as the meeting of heads of tourist administrations in Varanasi on the 17th of March. We note productive dynamic efforts of Indian presidency for strengthening multi-sectoral interaction and SCO for security and sustainable development in the region. There is stress on humanitarian topic for inter-civilizational dialogue, strengthening contact between nations, and to form the space of mutual understanding, friendship, and trust in the region. Several topics about culture. Since the 5th to the 7th of April, the oldest Russian center in Europe, the Russian center is in Belgrade, celebrated its 90th anniversary. It is opened in 1933 by the initiative of Russian Cultural Committee with the support of King Alexander I, Kara-Georgievich. It was the Russian house named after Nikolai II. It was the center for Russians who lost their motherland after the tragic events of 1970s. On the occasion of the anniversary, the Russian House opened an exhibition dedicated to Russian emigration in the kingdom of Serbians, Croatians, and Slovenians, future Yugoslavia. Exposition includes archive materials, digitalized documents, unique objects of art from the leading museums of Russia and Serbia, as well as from private collections. The Archive of Serbia gave to the Russian Center a book of visitors, which demonstrates that representatives of Russian immigration, for instance, Fyodor Shalapin, visited the house. The medal of the Minister of the Culture of the Russian Federation, great Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky, this is the name of the medal, was given to famous Serbian film director Emir Kusturica. Serbian historian, ex-ambassador of Serbia to Moscow, Slavenko Terzic, became a foreign member of Russian Science Academy. A Serbian Post presented mark 90 years since the establishment of the Russian House. Different people, representatives of the embassy of Russia, Trudnichestvo, for instance, Evgeny Primakov, as well as the director of the Department on Humanitarian Cooperation of the Foreign Ministry, Alexander Alimov, official representatives of Russia and Serbia, as well as cultural and art figures were at this meeting. As well, would like to speak about the exhibition about Sergei Rachmaninov in Paris. We continue celebrating 150th anniversary of his birthday. It's one of the memorable dates of UNESCO for this year. The events are dedicated to life and work of this legendary musician, and people are sincerely interested in Russian culture, and they visited this exhibition. It was opened on the 7th of April. It was prepared by Russian National Museum of Music with the support of the Russian Culture Ministry. It is based on the materials that in different times were provided by relatives and close friends of the composer. These documents were provided to museum. The project is presented in French language. It tells about Rachmaninoff as about composer, piano player, and conductor. Most part of the exhibition is multimedia content. Visitors can listen to archive recordings of the works of Sergei Rachmaninov performed by himself and other musicians. The day before, there was a roundtable discussion in the Russian House in Paris about family, about teachers, about friends, his heritage in Russia and abroad. General Director of the Russian National Museum of Music, Mikhail Brizgalov, spoke about that. Several important other events, for instance, the Independence Day of Zimbabwe on the 18th of April. On the 1980s, first democratic general election was celebrated in the country. This country has gone through a complex way of overcoming acute social-economic problems, consolidation in society to preserve internal political stability, defending their position on key issues of global and regional agenda. We highly appreciate traditionally friendly nature of our relations with Zimbabwe. They are based on mutual respect, consideration of mutual interests. Moscow and Harare are actively developing political dialogue. We are successfully continuing to interact on international arena, increase cooperation in trade, economy, humanitarian, and other spheres. We congratulate our Zimbabwean friends on their national holiday, and we sincerely wish the people of Zimbabwe well-being and prosperation and all the best. On the 18th of April, there will be one more event. It's a very important date. We're going to celebrate an international day of monuments and sites. It was established by the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, and it was approved by the General Conference of UNESCO on its 22nd session. Every year, its structure and its national committees organize events and actions to draw the attention to a very important humanitarian problem to protect and preserve world cultural heritage for future generations. All those who were speaking about canceling our culture, how are they going to participate and how are they going to interact with these structures? How can we imagine that? We need to preserve world culture for future generations, but, well, at the same time, we are going to cancel something that does not correspond to the ideas of some people. The topic of this celebration will be heritage in changing world. Russia is an active and responsible participant of different documents in the sphere: the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflicts, Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage. There are 31 World Heritage Sites in Russia. 20 monuments. There is also a list of 32 candidates for including in this list. As a member of the Committee on the World Heritage of UNESCO, this is a leading organ of the Convention 1972, Russia pays attention to the development of international cooperation to preserve and for sustainable administration of these objects on professional and depoliticized foundation. In line with the Hague Convention and the order of Defense Minister of Russia, the actions are taken to preserve World Heritage sites like museums, regional and culture institutions in Ukraine. However, some countries, with the connivance of their elder brothers in Washington and Brussels, are violating international law, neglecting their obligations to preserve culture and historical heritage, and they're showing off their unlawful actions. We see what happens. Monuments are demolished. Religious buildings are being demolished. In February 2014, the West brought to power in Ukraine neo-Nazis, and the process of violent forced derussification started in Ukraine. They're eliminating everything that connects the country with Russia and the Soviet Union. Almost all the monuments of the Soviet era were demolished. Monuments to Vladimir Lenin, to whom Ukraine owes its existence. Ukrainian radicals dismantled memorials to the soldiers of the Red Army that fought Nazis and their Ukrainian henchmen. They even destroyed graves of Soviet soldiers, gravestone of Nikolai Vatutin, who liberated Kiev, also was affected. It's a disease. We cannot stop it. We cannot make exceptions. We need to wait till it is cured, and I'm sure it will happen. And we are doing everything to do that. Monuments to writers, to poets, politicians, commanders, educators were destroyed. One of the most terrible acts of vandalism. I cannot find a word for this. Destruction, demolishment. I'm talking about the monument to Catherine the Great, Peter I, Alexander Suvorov, Alexander Pushkin, Leo Tolstoy, and many others. It is not just illogical, it is not just barbarian. They forgot that these monuments presented higher artistic value. They are fighting Pushkin on the territory of Ukraine, and they have been doing it for a long time. This is a mythical enemy that they have to defeat. But at the same time, monuments present cultural heritage. They not just represent someone, they by themselves are also a work of art. They continue this war with monuments. Neo-Nazi Kiev regime deprives people on Ukraine from their history, distorting rich culture. They replace this culture with narrow-minded nationalism soaked in Russophobia. But you understand that nothing will change the fact that all the history of the territories that were part or now are part of the Ukrainian state are intrinsically linked to Russian history, and we cannot rewrite it. In Poland, it is just a part of state policy. According to the national legislation, local bodies had to eliminate by the 31st of March 2018 communist symbols that were in their territory, including Soviet monuments, aside from burial sites. This campaign was started, and there were 561 objects of the Soviet military memorial heritage. They were in the list that was made in 1997 with the Polish authorities, and now just only around 100 of them. Soviet memorials and cultural objects are being demolished in the Baltic states. They used the events in Ukraine, and there was also a legal framework created for this. Latvia, violating Article 13 of bilateral governmental agreement on the social protection of military pensioners of 1994 has eliminated more than 120 Soviet monuments. In Estonia, more than 60. In Lithuania, around 30. They're using an absurd pretext of glorification of Russian imperialism. This is that they have created. They also want to demolish monuments to culture figures, scientists, and commanders that are located in city parks. If we're talking about UN, OCO, UNESCO, we are acting against these barbarian actions. But the deafening silence of international structures is going to have the most negative consequence, because in fact they are justifying the destruction of the heritage. And why do we need OSCE if it doesn't react to this? Yes, there are some security issues. But there is no security if the organization hasn't noticed it. So there are options for instance, to act on this issue, but no one says anything. If we're talking about human rights, no one says anything. In fact, OSCE is canceling itself. Since the 20th to the 20th of April, the 45th Moscow Film Festival is going to take place. It is one of the oldest and most important film festivals. It was started in 1935. The geography of countries participating in it is very wide. There will be films from 65 countries of all the regions of the world. China will present 23 films in different programs of the festival. France 18. Spain 15, US 12, India and Iran 10, Mongolia 2. There will be more than 30 international premieres at the festival. Many of the films presented at the film festival are dedicated to social economic problems of youth and the necessity to overcome generation gap. The jury of the contest will be headed by Indian filmmaker Rahul Ravel. The president for the jury for documentaries will be Chinese director Hao Yun. As for short films, it will be Italian director, screenwriter, and actor Giorgio Cugno. The film Balfinch by Boris Khlebnikov will open the film festival. At the end, at the closure of the festival, the film 42 Seconds by Alex Morel and Dani Lauredano will be shown. It is a sports drama created by Spain and France about Olympic Games in 1992 in Barcelona. On the 21st of April, it will be 20 years since the signing of Declaration on the Principles of Friendly Partnership between Russian Federation and Indonesia in the 21st century. It created a basis for bilateral cooperation for long term. We reached a qualitatively new level. Contacts at the highest level are regular. Leaders of Indonesia have visited our country 4 times. President of the Russian Federation has visited the archipelago twice. We systematically have contacts, reconcile ours on international bilateral topics. During 2022, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Indonesian counterpart, Retno Marsudi, have met 4 times on the sidelines of international forums. There is a wide range of issues of mutual interest. They are discussed constructively in a business-like manner during consultations between foreign ministries. We have productive interparliamentary dialogue. We have contacts between different cultural and religious organizations, scientific organizations. We are also working on strengthening legal basis for Russian-Indonesian relations. It gave impetus to our economic ties. Indonesia is one of our main partners. If we're talking about ASEAN countries, in 2022, bilateral turnover increased almost by 45%, reaching $4.79 billion. We implement several big projects in minerals production and processing. Russian-Indonesian Joint Commission on Trade, Economic and Technical Cooperation functions successfully. We also speak about agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and Indonesia. In current geopolitical conditions, the provisions of declaration that about Russia and Indonesia relations based on mutual respect and equality are very important. That it's very important to facilitate stable world order.
Common approaches to global issues allows our countries to efficiently interact within the United Nations and other multilateral platforms to deepen our cooperation within ASEAN-Russia strategic partnership. We are happy to note that Russia-Indonesia interaction is moving forward in line with the framework principles and guidelines shaped 20 years ago. On the 24th of April, the international community will celebrate the Diplomacy Day. This is a memorable date that was established upon Venezuela's initiative. As the chair of the non-alignment movement, it reminds that it is necessary to move away from the Cold War and zero-sum game mindset. Undoubtedly, amid degradation of the international security and undermining of trust due to the destructive actions by the U.S. and its satellites, member states should take all the efforts for the spirit of solidarity to gain the upper hand over egoistic, selfish, unilateral approaches. Russia is ready to such an endeavor. It is emblematic that this day Russia plans to organize open debates of the UN Security Council on the topic efficient multilateralism by protecting the principles of the UN Charter. This will be one of the central focal events of our chairmanship in April. The main goal of the session is to provide member states an opportunity to reaffirm their strict commitment to the key provisions of the UN Charter, primarily the ones that have to do with the sovereign equality of states and abandoning interference into domestic affairs. Besides that, amid an aggressive course by the collective West that wants to subdue the organization to its vested interests, it is necessary to send a clear message to support a depoliticized nature of the UN activities, which remains an indispensable platform as of now to search for collective answers to global issues. On the 24th of April 1963, the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations was opened for signing. This is the very document that we make reference to so often. We believe that the convention is one of the most important practical tools in the international law. Over the past years, it has become universal. It has helped a lot in consular work in the overwhelming majority of states of the world. We highlight an important idea enshrined in the convention, that it is contributed to the development of friendly relations among nations. At the same time, lately, a number of states unfriendly to Russia have been acting in a way that undermines the convention and erodes its unifying nature. They erode certain provisions of the convention. For instance, Article 2 on the size of the consular staff, Article 23 on persons declared non grata. In order to justify mass expulsions of our consular staff, at the same time, authorities of these states turn a blind eye to their commitments to take measures to protect consular premises, to guarantee their immunity and protection, including from the acts of vandalism. Unfortunately, such unfriendly steps impact adversely the opportunity to efficiently implement one of the most important consular functions, namely to protect the compatriots' interests in the host country. Hopefully, by joining hands, we'll be able to multiply the constructive experience that was accumulated over the past years to manage consular relations and to help unlock its potential for the decades to come. With that, I'm ready to take your questions. International Life, are you here with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. Earlier this week, Foreign Minister of Germany demanded that countries that host sporting events should not issue visas for Russian athletes. And I quote, countries that host key sporting events can do something against the decisions of the International Olympic Committee. If we organize an international contest in Germany, we could act accordingly. and we will stick to our clear position. That's what she said. How would you comment on that? Certainly, that is nothing short of another infringement on the independence of sport. And it is inadmissible to have any bias in this area and an attempt to harm our country amid total sanctions that were imposed against our country in the area of sports purely for political reasons. Such actions of Western officials are at odds with the framework and the fundamental values of the Olympic movement. The main of them is to ensure by all countries and to ensure to all countries and to all athletes an equal access to competition, and naturally ensure the principle that sport should be out of politics. When I hear and read these statements, and there are quite a number of them, sometimes it is said by some illiterate people that believe that they can comment on this without any fundamental knowledge. Well, let's leave it aside. But that is a problem of the past centuries. But I hear such statements by officials, by ministers, by representatives of regimes, or at times sports experts that have some official posts. When they start saying something of this sort, I want to ask them, have you read the documents that you signed? It's not just some literature, but these are documents that manage the area of sports. The fact that Russia might not participate in key international competition lowers the bar, the competition bar. Without Russian athletes, international tournaments lose their appeal, lose their allure, and I'm not talking only about the athletes, but also the audience. You cannot expect a serious competition and fight, because that is the main part of sports area. For its part, Russia remains an open and hospitable country. We can host international competitions at the highest level. We participate in significant international competitions with the environment of friendship, fair play, and solidarity. We are always happy to host competition and welcome athletes who stand for the sport without artificial restrictions and discrimination. Such people as the Interior Ministry of Germany, well, this is just shameful. It's shameful not just to hear and to listen to that. It's just shameful for them to say that. Since you have no further questions, do have RT Russia Today. Alexander Morozov, if I may, I have two questions. Hello. The Washington Post claims that Polish and Ukrainian authorities could be involved in the explosions at the Nord Stream gas pipelines. At the same time, the same article stipulates that NATO countries are not interested in getting to the crux of the matter. In your view, how serious can we be about these versions that appear in Western media outlets? And what's your take on the possible US involvement that was described by Seymour Hersh? Listen, a terrorist attack took place. Maybe other countries have their own assessment, but we provided our own assessment. An extremist action took place that undermined civil infrastructure of crucial importance. I'm talking about civil infrastructure of peaceful nature, as I've already mentioned. They declared an investigation between the countries, inside the countries, as you have heard. This was made not to engage other countries to determine the truth, to have more opportunities to determine the truth, but to understand what position they take and who they are siding against. There was a lack of progress whatsoever, and I'm talking about the investigation by Western countries. They're constantly hushing and they make some indecent slip of the tongue that allegedly Russia will not be party to the investigation, and they have some secret suspicions. They will not share anything. Later on they said that it's hard to reveal the truth. They do not wish to have an active and transparent investigation, and that brought about the relevant reports in the media outlets. You might say, well, that is correct, but there are two important points to that. First, previously there were some high-profile cases, and they took place in the same way by Western countries, 24/7 broadcasting. The audience was dragged into the discussion process. And second point, instantly they found the culprit. Even in most complex cases, they immediately found the culprit and they immediately rushed to the mic to tell about it. So there are two factors of Western behavior within the previous years, and this gave suspicion and this perplexed countries, journalists and experts. They were wondering what happened differently this case. Why are there no official statements regarding the investigation? Why are there no comments by experts who would sit and broadcast it 24/7, as was the case previously? And why has there been no progress to identify the truth? That is not characteristical to the very countries I'm talking about. Representatives of political parties, regimes, the acting administration so far, before that, they behaved in an opposite way. And having said that, media, bloggers, journalists had some doubts, had some questions, and even versions. With regard to the versions, indeed, there are a raft of them. I'm ready to discuss those versions that first are assigned to. That means that there are authors of these versions. They put their name under these versions, and they are openly stating that. As for the anonymous sources that are quoted by different media, that is of no interest to us. We already saw this system in the British media, so that is of no interest to us whatsoever. We do not wish to comment on that. And that is not possible to comment on that, because if there is a position, and I beg your pardon, that is not speculation, we're talking about a specific investigation, and these leaks should have an author. How come that there are no people that could state that they were the authors of this version? Indeed, there were some suspicions, and there were articles by the Washington Post, but they do not reveal their sources. They don't even say what agency they got their information from, or even what country they got their information from. That cannot be commented on. Let's get down to the background story, because the most important thing, probably you read detective stories, but you also know, judging by the detective stories, that the main thing is the reason, the motive. So the crime is being investigated by taking into account the background story. As of now, the US continues to claim that they are not involved in these developments, but it is clear that they are the main beneficiary. Let me recall you that there was one person who put his name to it and his many years of investigative journalism, and that is Seymour Hersh. He gave an exhaustive answer to that. Initially, Washington publicly threatened to undermine this pipeline. After that, Antony Blinken and Victoria Nuland gloated about the destruction of the pipeline. I believe that that was a session of the US Congress, and they reported to the Congress. They were gloating about this mountain of metal at the bottom of the sea. The American side tries to get away with neglecting these facts. They try to inject some various speculations about Kyiv or Warsaw engagement and unclear explanations by the American satellites. This all confirms the Seymour Hersh version, and let me remind you that that is a very important journalist. It's not just a journalist who found some documents. It's not clear who stands behind him. His professional activities stand behind him. He was the very person who investigated the Watergate case, and that is stipulated in the American textbooks on politics, journalism, forensic science, and so on. After the Security Council session on the 27th of March that did not adopt a Russia-China resolution on Nord Stream, we even have mounted suspicions on the US administration involvement to the sabotage. Washington and its allies did their utmost to avoid an objective, transparent, multilateral investigation of the Nord Stream explosions. We are confident that if the administration was interested in restoring, in identifying the truth, they would have been acting in a different way. And by the way, there are examples in this case, but in this case, they were not under suspicion. They were the ones who were pointing the fingers in international organizations. They wanted to launch some criminal investigations, even when it was at odds with the mandate of these international organizations. There is no doubt that many states of the West, including Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, are scared of voicing the names of culprits and orchestrators of this terrorist attack. We insist on a comprehensive and open investigation, international investigation, involving Russian experts. We believe that all those involved in Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines explosion would be revealed, and the crime will be solved. Russia will do its utmost not to, for Collective West not to hush up this topic. I believe you had a second question. Yes, a recapping question. The Council of Europe allegedly wanted to establish some register for damage made by Russian aggression against Ukraine. How would you comment on these plans? Well, that's quite an interesting topic. Has the Council of Europe thought about making a register for damage around the Nord Stream gas pipeline explosion? Because the damage was done by those who orchestrated this explosion, to those who started implementing the civil infrastructure, leaving aside the environmental agenda. There will be no such register. Why? Well, just because. Maybe because they have some doubts, have some suspicions who is behind these explosions. Regarding the countries that I've already mentioned, who are raising their voices high in the Council of Europe, but some of them are not even party to this organization. And let me give an additional assessment to what you have mentioned. Let me remind you that we have kissed the Council of Europe goodbye more than a year ago, but looks like Strasbourg cannot deal with that, cannot put up with it.
I will not forgive anything. This is the motto. That is what I feel from every resolution of the Council of Europe. They are obsessed with Russia. They don't want to think about anything else. It's not just about special military operation. I'll remind, they tried to expel us, to restrict our rights, not to give us the right of vote. We have such experience, and any other state hasn't received any such meticulous and biased attention as our country has. And there is nothing surprising in it. The Council of Europe is being used by the West, and I'm talking about NATO and the US, in hybrid war against Russia. First of all, as an instrument of legal aggression. We should not forget that this organization, in many ways, lost its original sense of existence that is enshrined in your charter. It lost its European coordinates. It became an ideological department of the European Union. And we know that there is NATO. Its bureaucracy in Strasbourg that is received a lot of money, and it's harder to fool around taxpayers and trying to demonstrate that there is sense in their work. Everyone understands this is just an organ of propaganda. Before, they worked with human rights, mostly. There were many events, and it was shown that they were the first ones not to work with the human rights, so they started to do everything about these human rights, they adopted different resolutions about sexual minorities and gender and others. As for civil and social rights that are being restricted, Strasbourg just cannot work with that. They were created for something else. Originally, they were created for different purposes. But in the last years, in the recent years, they were dealing with completely different issues. The potential, the material and financial resources are being used to harm our country even more. You have spoken that should be made to work in these conditions. The people of Donetsk and Lugansk had to do a lot to receive pensions and other financial assistance. Just remember what they had to do. They had to come to the territory controlled by Ukraine, and only then they could receive the money. Just remember the Normand format. Everyone said that they're going to work with the Kiev regime. They'll do something to help people so that people could receive money, that they could receive assistance. I'm not talking about loans for holidays. We're not talking about grants for political actions. This is what they have earned by their labor. Nothing was done. If not for Russian humanitarian assistance to these regions, people would just die. We also should remember the freezing, or in fact theft, of Russian foreign assets. They're not counting it, but we are counting. We are good and we have a good memory. They do not understand that what a bottomless Pandora box they are opening. Many countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America should look into this experience. It's very interesting because they should think about the creation of their own register of damage from century-old colonial and continuing neo-colonial exploitation. I'm talking about West exploiting these countries of Asia and Africa, first of all. They should create a register of damage from genocide of entire nations, soaking of natural resources and cultural values. And let's remember slave trade. Have you counted something about it? Or racism, for instance. It also was costly for many nations and peoples. I don't know what is more in this idea. Hypocrisy, foolishness, or I'll say this word, lack of humanity. Do the authors understand that such projects lead to further escalation of confrontation on the continent, and we don't know what will be the consequences? I have recently participated in a political discussion. There was one question regarding the U.S. The U.S. speaks about damage and tribunals. How are they treating their own indigenous people? Have they counted everything? I'm not talking about financial assistance. Have they counted the number of people that were killed, the number of indigenous peoples, Indians? Do they know everything about what happened? Does the current generation know the history of their ancestors? Do they know what their ancestors did? Can they imagine what was done and how the U.S. was created? The foundation was not the liberty, not democracy, not the desire to create a new nation without the heavy heritage of the Europe that was colonizing these territories. The foundation was the extermination of indigenous people. It was not just for several years. It was terrible because they were torturing people. They were experimenting on these people. They tried to stop the development of these people, on the peoples that lived there. One more thing. This register will be created as part of partially enlarged agreement of the Council of Europe. Only 16 of the 46 members are enough. The initiators understand that they cannot hope for full unanimity. Can you imagine what will happen? People will count, countries will count damage against each other. we don't need to explain why we're going to say that this is legally null and void, and this is an act hostile against Russia Federation. Portal News New, are you here? Yes, we are here. Newsroom is here. I have several questions. First of all, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, said that the work on the treaty with Armenia is not very smooth. Do you plan to have any trilateral meetings to speak about this? And can I please first answer this question? I want to say that we continue our work to help Armenia and Azerbaijan to prepare a peace treaty. Our partners agreed to have another round of bilateral negotiations on our territory. As for the dates of the events, we will inform you when it will be agreed on, when we can publish this information. Another issue, you spoke about the incident yesterday at the Azerbaijan border. Is it possible that this escalation is because of the actions of Western countries in South Caucasus? That is what is presented in the media. Just understand, I don't need to analyze relations and this incident. We have spoken about this. We didn't make assumptions. We presented our analysis that other players were involved and other structures were involved. These structures and people were never dealing with this conflict. And this will never have any additional value. This will not have any effect to reach peace. Unfortunately, it will be used and it will lead to escalation, to destabilization. It will impede reaching peaceful settlement. We have said it. We cannot say that this is about this or this is about that. We cannot speak about the influence of some forces. We have analyzed it. We have predicted it, if you can say it like that. We used analysis and we shared it, and we predicted something inevitable. We wanted to do it at the time, but we had to share our view on it. Unfortunately, now we see what is happening and we regret about what we see. We see different manifestations of involvement of external players in this situation. These players never acted constructively, and now they are additionally destabilizing the situation. Thank you. The next question. American Analytical Center Institute of the Study of War said that Russia will declare a ceasefire because of Easter. What are the conditions of this ceasefire? Has Russia received any official suggestions from Kiev? We haven't received any official suggestions from Kiev about Easter ceasefire. Well, it will not happen. Well, it will hardly happen because of the belligerent attitude of Kiev to continue hostilities. As you know, humanity and compassion for Zelensky regime is something strange. They create precedents. They commit acts of vandalism where we do not expect them. As for normalizing situation or thinking about anyone, this is not the style of Kiev regime. Human life doesn't mean anything to them. This is the ideology that was put there by the West through pro-Western and Western politicians, and now it is being implemented under the motto war until the last Ukrainian. We remember very well when at the beginning of the year Kiev continued fire during Christmas and they ignored our urge to for ceasefire. You all saw this. So I'm talking about Kiev regime. We cannot expect any Christian mercy from it. South Africa is going to have negotiations with the US on the immunity of the president of the Russian Putin during his visit to South Africa. I do know something about the talks between South Africa and US. I don't have any information about negotiations about this. I have seen some messages in the media, but I don't have any materials, any general materials or specific ones. I think you should ask it from the parties that you have mentioned. If Russia is mentioned and there are any other developments, we can comment on that. Thank you. One last question. Has the American side taken any attempts to start negotiations about exchanging the journalist of Wall Street Journal, Mr. Gershkovich? We have stressed repeatedly that these issues are dealt with by relevant structures. We see very strange dynamics in creating noise with support of American authorities or some other structures around this situation. They think that if there is more noise, it will help them somehow. But they forget the experience of the previous period when this never helped the situation. There are special channels, there are structures that work with this. They have to deal with it. No one else should deal with it. Media Corporation of China, are you here? Hello. We have two questions. American media say that in Twitter and other social networks, there's several classified documents of the U.S. For instance, one of them exposed surveillance of Mr. Zelensky. Guardian informed that disclosure of more than 100 strictly confidential documents is just the tip of the iceberg. Some media think that it demonstrates that U.S. and NATO are deeply involved in the conflict between Moscow and Kiev. How can you comment on this? You're surprising me. You needed some leak for that, some articles. It is understandable. NATO, the US, the United Kingdom are deeply involved in it. And not just deeply involved, they are directing all of it. They are destabilizing situation in this region through Kiev. It is obvious. No one is hiding it. They're just saying that they are not party in the conflict. But they haven't hidden information about their involvedness. They are just presenting it everywhere. They were showing off their historical role, saying that that is their mission. What should we expect from it, or what should we analyze additionally? Yes, there are some nuances, some additional facts. Is anyone doubting on the planet that the so-called collective West is not behind this story? As for surveillance, I don't want to comment on this anonymous source of information and information that is thrown in. I want just to say, is that in use that the U.S. follows their allies? Someone didn't know it. If they didn't know it, they just don't follow the agenda.
Let me just remind you that a couple of years ago, data were published. They were officially recognized by the German side, by many experts, that all phones all devices of Chancellor Merkel were eavesdropped by its closest allies, the United States, and everybody just shrugged shoulders and said, okay, let's move on. Is there something new to that? Of course not. Moreover, there are many archived documents that were top secret. After that, they were declassified. This is no leak. These were no documents that were stolen. That's just the documents that were declassified due to the time expiry. Let me just cite an example that I've already mentioned. Probably you already know it. Well-known writer, Ernest Hemingway, said that he was eavesdropped, he was followed, and everybody believed that he was mentally sick. But after his death, turned out that he indeed was spied. They were collecting data, and everything that they refuted was corroborated by this secret classified documents. As for Zelensky, well, he is packed with everything American, devices, surveillance means, and a close ring round of circles, people that claim that they are Ukrainians. At the same time, they have American and other types of passports. Since 2014, all members of the government of Ukraine were members of different states, despite their legislation. So these are no breaking news. Basically, that's that. Thank you. And I have a second question. Lately, Emmanuel Macron claimed that the strategic autonomy is the key goal of the European policy. He doesn't want Europe to become a vassal. He also claimed that Europe should minimize its dependence from the US with regard to weapons, energy, and dollar extraterritoriality. He said that Europe should wake up, should think about its interests, and should not follow the American pace. What's your take on that? Does this mean that Europe starts realizing the essence of the policy by the US? Well, that's quite an old story. I don't want to be a person that would give some pieces of advice or make some medical conclusions. But traditionally, when he practices what he preaches, a person is considered to be sane and healthy. When his words are at odds with his actions, well, that raises some doubts. Maybe that's a person who doesn't live up to his promises. Maybe he's immoral. Maybe he has nothing to do with morality and ethics. Or probably he has some deep-rooted problems. I'm sorry, but there are French actions. The actions by the French government, by the Macron administration, and steps that are taken by the executive authorities for his second term in office. And these actions speak for themselves. The same bright statements were made by Macron regarding NATO. Allegedly, NATO is brain dead. That's what he said. At the same time, I do not recall that France withdrew from NATO. He made one statement, but that doesn't fit the reality. I believe that this should be analyzed by the French society, by the French citizens, political scientists, rank-and-file citizens, politicians. They should do that. They should deal with that and how the words of the French leadership fit their actions. Such an approach and such a desire to express the desire to be sovereign from the US comes as nothing new. Such calls were voiced previously, especially during the Trump presidency. You're well aware of that. There was a keynote address by President Macron in the Sorbonne University in 2017 when he insisted that it is necessary to raise the European sovereignty. And back in the day, the same time in 2019, he said that NATO is brain dead. This was all in the past. We did not forget about his attempts to promote a constructive approach towards relations with Russia. In 2019, there was a launch of a Russia-French strategic dialogue to build a new security and trust architecture in Europe in the city of Besançon. Once again, this has all been already stated and it has not been corroborated. And second, the steps taken by the French president, as well as by his executive authorities, they speak to the opposite. In practice, the EU basically, well, we have seen in practice that the words by the French leadership in this specific case were at odds with his actions. The EU shows that it has lost its political sovereignty and it is dependent from the US. The EU has not even moved closer to becoming a third world powerhouse. In many ways, the stalling of the European strategic autonomy project can be explained by the fact that other European countries are not mature enough, they're not ready to conduct independent policy. Some of them are continuing to pursue Washington policy. They prefer others to address their problems in policy, economy, and other walks of life. And this shows, this has been shown by examples when it comes to the EU that refused to buy Russian gas upon Western demands. This gas ensured decades of prosperity in the EU, and now we see that the EU abandons this gas. In return, it buys very expensive US gas. We also see this Nord Stream explosion, the wiring by the American security services of the European leadership, and French and Australian contract on submarine construction was also derailed. What kind of political sovereignty can we talk about? On the 10th of January, there was a EU-NATO declaration adopted, and without any qualms, it enshrined the use of EU resources to address its own geopolitical tasks to deter Russia, China, and other sovereign states. Paris obediently fit into the course by Washington to stir up confrontation with Russia, to support recklessly the Kiev regime, basically to be party to the criminal actions. It is hard to believe that France is able to become a genuine leader from those political forces in Europe that indeed want to have a genuine independence and strategic autonomy. We believe that amid the current multipolar world, the independent Europe focused on ensuring its own interests will be something that is beneficial to the majority of its citizens, but so far there's still a long road to go. No matter the words, there are specific actions and steps. Let's move on. Anadolu, are you here with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. We have 3 questions today. The first one has to do with the leak of the US and NATO documents on Ukraine. Allegedly, this was done by Russian security agencies. Could you please comment on that? Actually, I have already given my comment. You can engage in any types of speculation. Soon they will say that ETs are actually harming them. I believe that I shouldn't comment on this gibberish, but most importantly, it's high time for the US officials to comment on these developments. Pentagon security agencies of the US, the State Department, the White House, let them explain what is happening there. Once they tell it to us, once they provide us with specific facts, we will comment on that if there is something to do with Russia. But so far, these are just conspiracy theories. Thank you. Second question. Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, announced on Monday that foreign ministers of Turkey, Russia, Syria, and Iran will probably meet in early May in Moscow. Do you have any other details? Could you announce the date for this meeting? I cannot give you the date. Once we get the specific date, we will definitely share it with you. I can say that we're currently preparing for this meeting. We are finalizing the dates, given the schedule, the working schedule of the foreign ministers. That is no easy task. But once we agree on all these aspects, we'll share it with you. Thank you. And the last question. Lately, you have stated that UK supplies of depleted uranium projectiles to Ukraine is a message that London wants to turn this country into scorched earth. At the same time, President Putin claimed that Moscow will have to respond in this case. Have you taken any preemptive actions against the supplies of these depleted uranium projectiles to Ukraine? Indeed, statements by the UK that it is ready to supply this kind of shells to Ukraine is a serious threat, including to the people of Ukraine that London wants to help, allegedly. Our concerns remain in force despite many warnings. London has not abandoned its malevolent plans. And probably they hope that they can get away with murder once again, as it was the case in Iraq, in Serbia, and so on. But that will not happen. You will not get away with murder this time. The Russian side continues to actively use all the existing platforms and resources to draw the international attention to this matter. Basically, we're ringing the alarm. The most important thing is for the international community not to believe that they can get away with that. But this problem will affect everyone. Let me remind you that one of the best examples is the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Due to some natural disasters, man-made disasters, part of radioactive materials was spilled in the water. Do you remember the time it took for these materials to reach other countries? So far, they have failed to mitigate these consequences. Does anybody have any illusions that if you pollute soil and environment in one part of the globe, this will backfire in other countries and in other peoples? Do you have any illusions? We have constantly stated that it is inadmissible to have these supplies within the Security Council and the OSCE Forum for Security and Cooperation. This will further destabilize the situation, protract the conflict, and maximize the suffering of the civilians, including radioactive pollution, as I've already mentioned. We assume that London should still have some common sense, and probably it would prevent its criminal plans. And if that is not the case, as you have rightly said, Russia will act accordingly. Thank you. Newsweek.
We've noticed an increase in attacks claimed by alleged anti-Russian government organizations within the Russian Federation, including acts of sabotage, assassinations, even cross-border raids from groups calling themselves various names such as Russian Volunteer Corps, National Republican Army, Combat Organization of Anarcho-Communists, Black Bridge. And I'd like to ask, how concerned is the Russian Federation about these activities? And is there any known link to foreign governments such as Ukraine or even the United States? Thank you.
Меня, конечно, поражает. Вы же вроде американский.
Well, that comes as a surprise. You are an American journalist and you are not concerned about the fate of your colleague. That is odd to me, but if that is a question of a priority to you, if you care so much about the Russian citizens, well, chapeau. First, we have witnessed 1990s in Russia. Let me remind you that this was about the fight against the international terrorism in Northern Caucasus, and we do remember that under the flag of domestic terrorism and separatism that was presented as the love for freedom, actually the international terrorism was perpetrating atrocities against our country from within and against our citizens. That is why we have the experience and we have the expertise on how to deal with that, and we have the real assessments of what is happening. That's one thing. First, when it comes to the links with the Kiev regime and who is behind the Kiev regime, the link between this regime and the terrorist attacks, well, this is an obvious thing for us. I do not represent law enforcement, security services. I am building upon their data, their materials, and obviously we see a link with the Kiev regime, sometimes with somebody else, but you should ask this question to the law enforcers. They publish the relevant materials, and I believe that we'll see new materials in the near future. I can also say that Russian security services that are selflessly fighting against terrorism, they're controlling the situation in this area. They are efficiently preventing many of the terrorist attacks that were planned. They are also investigating crimes that were perpetrated. That is why these crimes cannot be justified, and there will be punishment for these crimes. Last but not least, you asked a question regarding the United States and their participation. The Kiev regime in its entirety is a child conceived by the United States of America. It has been created for many years. A lot of funds have been allocated. There were coups d'etats orchestrated. People came to power and they were not expressing the will of the Ukrainian people. These were no democratic procedures. They came to power as a result of coup d'etat. That means that the United States is behind and is responsible for everything that the Kiev regime is doing. And we have not hidden it. Do you have any other questions? Thank you. RTVI channel. Hello, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions. Within Ankara, Sergei Lavrov complained that Russia-UN memorandum has not been implemented on the export of Russian agricultural goods. Did you get any proposals on the Russian requirements after the grain deal was extended for the 16 days? And do you believe that the Russian part of the deal will be implemented? There should be no proposals, but you should implement what has been agreed upon. That should be clear. That's one thing. And secondly, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has already commented on that. He made a statement at the press conference. He gave a detailed overview, and you've already provided some quotes of these statements. I would like to give another reference to President Putin at his address to the Russia-Africa conference. There was also a statement by Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin. He said that 60 days are enough to take an objective assessment of the UN assurances on unblocking Russian exports of grain and fertilizers to global markets. The Russian leadership stated that we will make up our mind within this time frame, and we will decide on our future actions. We said what we are not happy about. We took a number of steps to show it not in words but in deed, and once the 60 days expire, we will take the relevant decisions.
As for the motives, everyone knows about them and everyone knows our requirements. The second question, in Ankara, Sergei Lavrov said the initiatives to make Russia and Ukraine sit at the table of negotiation is a symptom of situation because of the policy of the US to create full hegemony in international relations. And we need to, based on the principles of a new world order that we all need, based on the UN Charter. What are the principles that must be enshrined? Will they be included in the requirements of the Russian party to start peaceful negotiations on the Ukrainian conflict? First of all, we support more just, more democratic world order that would guarantee security, preserving of cultural and civilizational originality, equal opportunities for development of all states. We can guarantee it only in the context of multipolar system of international relations. We can list the principles, but it will take a lot of time. They are all can be seen in our new foreign policy concept. It was approved by the President on the 31st of March. I can just name them: equality of states, sovereign equality of states, cooperation on the basis of balance of interests, diversity of cultures, diversity of civilizations, and many others. That is what we called international law. That is what enshrined in the UN Charter. One more question. The creation of new world order and the principles you named, can we say that this is the requirement of Russia to start negotiations? This is our concept of foreign policy, of Russian foreign policy. It is our global approach to international relations. These are the principles on what everything is based. Our bilateral relations, relations within international organizations. This is how we are going to present the initiatives. These are the principles of our foreign policy. Negotiations, contacts. I'm not going to give specifics. I'm just talking generally. These are the principles that can be found in the foreign policy concept. Moscow Post, are you here? Yes, hello. We have two questions. We have commented on the threats with the supply of depleted uranium to Ukraine. How are you going to define the fact that these projectiles were supplied and how they were used? This fact was determined by British authorities themselves because they said that they have such an intention. As for the details, this is the question for Defense Ministry. The fact of the use or the supply of depleted uranium projectiles can be determined precisely. We have all the necessary means of objective control to do that. As you understand, Foreign Ministry does not deal with it, but other relative structures, they have all the necessary possibilities for it. But I hope that the United Kingdom will understand all the negative consequences of what they're going to do and the responsibilities they're going to take if they supply these projectiles and they will be used. As for declaration of the Foreign Ministry on Finland, it was about political problems in relations after the country joined NATO. What can you expect from relations from this country that is our neighbor and that was a neutral country before? We were trying to have mutually beneficial, good relations based on good neighborliness. The basis was economic relations, decades of bilateral ties, This was the approach, and it was destroyed by the authorities of Finland. They decided to start a confrontation policy against our country. They joined Western propaganda and psychosis. As for the prospects, they need to coincide with the actions of Finland, and we have repeatedly spoken about that. It was not our choice. We said that it would affect bilateral relations. The key condition to restore our interaction, as is said in the foreign policy concept, is that Europe has to understand that there is no alternative to mutually beneficial cooperation with Russia and peaceful coexistence. We have to work on the basis of good neighborliness. It also concerns relations with Finland. All these principles are enshrined in this new document, and they will be implemented in all the cases in the work in different areas of our foreign policy. The television of Armenia. My name is Maria Zakharova. I have 3 questions. The first question was already answered partially. Yesterday, Azerbaijan forces opened fire. The Armenian party responded, and there was a provocation. 4 people died, 6 people were injured. What do you think about the fact that territorial integrity was violated once again? I have already commented on this, and I have nothing to add to this. The second question. Azerbaijan is violating trilateral declaration on the 9th of November 2020. They are closing Lachin corridor. On the 4th of April, Azerbaijan did not allow Russian peacemakers to transport 27 civilians to Nagorno-Karabakh. They exposed them to psychological pressure and intimidation. How do you evaluate actions of Azerbaijan? As you remember, we support full disblocking of Lachin corridor. Our defense ministry commandment of Russian peacemakers is also taking actions with support of the foreign ministry. Our Armenian and Azerbaijani partners have detailed suggestions for this. Our peacemakers provide food and essential goods to those who live in Nagorno-Karabakh. Dozens of tons of humanitarian aid is being supplied. We hope that the bilateral relations will be normalized between Armenia and Azerbaijan on the basis of agreements on the highest level. Thank you. And the last question. In the context of the Sergei Lavrov's visit to Turkey, process of normalizing relations between Armenia and Turkey was discussed. What was stated there? You know, I would not like to disclose all these details because the process has not ended yet. Diplomacy should have an opportunity for meticulous work in this sensitive environment. As for our position, we have repeatedly said it. We support mutually respectful dialogue between Yerevan and Ankara. It was started with our direct participation in January 2022. We're sure that, well, I'm not going to tell you all the story of normalization. You all know about our participation in different formats. We're sure that the so-called thaw will contribute to improval of situation on the South Caucasus and will contribute to long-term stability in the region. Recently, the process is developing, and we are ready to facilitate its implementation. Did you have any other questions? No, this was the last question. Yes, thank you. Verelk, are you here? Yes, Maria Vladimirovna, we are here. I have one question, but first of all, I would like to ask something. You said, you spoke about the role of Russia in the escalation because of new provocation by Azerbaijan. But the deputy from the governing party said that there were no mediation efforts, and they can regulate situation only because thanks to direct negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We are not saying that the direct work has nothing to do with it, that it is not important. It is great that parties can agree on the most complex issues. I was just speaking about our help and about our assistance. I think our assistance to the situation must be commented not only by some representatives of political movements, but also by executive powers that are responsible for this. Well, I can agree with these evaluations, comment on them, but there can be many opinions, as many as there are people. Well, I'm speaking about the representative of governing party, but we are speaking about Armenia. It is a democratic country and everyone can express their own opinion. Well, you should not laugh. Well, I'm a little bit skeptic about this. The second question that I would like to ask, it is about negotiations with Armenia about CSTO mission in the Republic. Do you have any specific agreements? When can we expect the deployment? Well, I'm not citing someone from the governing party, but no, I'm not going to say that you are quoting someone. I'm going to quote Mr. Lavrov, the foreign minister of the Russian Federation. He has noted that a Russian country is satisfied that Armenia is still interested in accepting CSTO peacemakers. If Yerevan is ready, we can return to specifics, to specific modalities of CSTO mission deployment in Armenia. Can you give any dates? You should ask Yerevan, not us, because this is the mission that goes to Yerevan that may be deployed in Yerevan. This is a question to them. Thank you. Uraru, are you here? Yes, hello. Artem Alexandrov, Uraru. The first question concerns the Parliament of Latvia that considers the bill on emigration. Does the Foreign Ministry follow it? What is the position of Moscow? Are you ready to receive Russians that can be deported from Latvia if they don't pass the exam on the Latvian language? This is just a savage attempt to solve Russian question. This is the only thing we can call it. Before, they had some kind of desire to neutralize the situation or leave some kind of a chance to solve the situation. I'm talking about governing circles, but what we see now is they are imposing this line, they're imposing this policy. This happens not only in Latvia, but also in Estonia and Lithuania, when people are deprived of their resident status, long-term resident status. They cannot go anywhere. They don't have any work or houses or in other countries. They don't have relatives in other countries. People are expelled just because they want to have access to their culture, to their language, they want to have they want to be related to the historic motherland. People could not model the situation at the time. They lived, they were they have been living, they have been creating in these republics. This is why such xenophobian policy should be condemned, as well as the relevant international platforms. But at these platforms, it is blocked by the Western masters that for many years have been using the Baltic countries as a foothold of Russophobia. Thanks to the support by Russia, I'm sure that our compatriots will not be left alone. Thank you. The second question is about grain deal. You have spoken about this. So this is an additional question. Russia has prolonged this grain deal, but said that the conditions are not being fulfilled. What is the possibility that this time, if this continues, it will happen again? I have quoted the deputy foreign minister and the foreign minister. After 60 days, we will make the conclusions. Will the requirements be fulfilled or not? We have given all the explanations. As for Armenia, before it didn't want to have CSTO exercises on its territory and decided to participate in NATO exercises. What does the foreign minister think about this position of Yerevan? Can it be seen as a hostile act or unfriendly act of Yerevan against Russia that can worsen our bilateral ties? I'm not going to repeat that the topic of STO that I have already commented on. As for NATO, they are continuing their practice to actively involve member countries. They introduce NATO standards. They're trying to reformat the defense complex of the states, have levers of influence on their internal and foreign policy processes. First of all, it concerns post-Soviet space. It is a space for geopolitical confrontation with Russia. They are trying to discredit cooperation of different countries with Russia. We're talking about anti-Russian and even Russophobic actions. It destabilizes the situation in different regions, increases conflict potential, creation of new divisive lines. We requested explanations from our Armenian partners about their participation in these exercises, and we will now wait for the answer and then we'll respond. It is regrettable that they don't want to have CSTO exercises on their territory, and it does not contribute to regional security. This is just additional answer to what I've already said about Armenia and CSTO. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. One question. Special services of the SCO in 2023 are going to have anti-terrorist exercises in Kyrgyzstan. This is the information of the regional anti-terrorist structure. It was set after the 39th session of this council of the organization on the 7th of April in Tashkent. They're going to prevent the use of internet in terrorist, separatist and extremist goals. What is this first anti-terrorist operation? Can you comment on this? What is this? Our country, as you know, prioritizes cooperation in fighting threats and challenges to security in SCO. These are decisions made at the 39th session of the Soviet as regional anti-terrorist structure of the SCO that you mentioned. It will help to coordinate the work of relevant organs to fight terrorism, separatism, and extremism. As for the first joint information operation on prevention of use of internet in terrorist, separatist, and extremist goals, we're talking about the reaction of the organization to the distribution of radical ideology and terrorist propaganda in digital space, about recruitment of new followers, financing of criminal activities of terrorists with the use of modern information technologies. Relevant organs of the member states of SCO work on this. This is a very sensitive topic. We can make the conclusions about the operation only when it is finalized. Well, thank you very much. I wish you well. See you soon.